Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Today, billions of people are celebrating Christmas. And rightly so. This festival is a unifying festival in the divided world. But then the politicians always try to hijack the cultural, the religious, the social aspect and impart it a political coloring to suit their own agenda. I've been hearing some politicians trying to allege, albeit wrongly, that Jesus was a socialist. He was not. He was a great, compassionate human being who loved the downtrodden, who loved the poor, and his empathy was amazing. He was, as per the tradition, a giver of sight to the blind, a person who cured the lepers and welcomed them, who welcomed the poor, the deprived, with all the compassion, but never with pity. There's a difference. To call him Jesus a socialist is a height of lack of knowledge and understanding, and a perversion of the idea that he could be a socialist. He was never for equalization. He was never for saying rob Peter to pay Paul. He was always for the social norms to be maintained. And it was he who said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And yet the claim made by a populist politician, rather a group of politicians, a socialist has become a popular refrain among the liberals. And from them, Rome Christianity is lukewarm at the best. These statements need to be examined so that the image of Jesus is not sullied. You have to define what socialism is. A century ago, it was widely regarded as the government ownership of the means of production. Jesus never hinted at that concept, let alone endorsed it. However, this definition has changed over time, and now when Milton Friedman demolished it and reality proved to be devastating right that the government is not meant for business, now the socialists have shifted to the version. That's the central planning of the economy. And you can score the New Testament and would not find a single word that Jesus calls for empowering politicians and bureaucrats to allocate resources, to pick winners and losers, tell entrepreneurs how to run their business, impose minimum wages or maximum prices, compel workers to join unions, or even to raise taxes. When the Pharisees attempted to trick Jesus into Nazareth, into endorsing tax evasion, he very clearly responded that the property belongs to the state and said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and to God which is God. Nonetheless, one of the charges that led to Jesus' crucifixion was indeed tax evasion, but he never wanted it. And tax evasion is not a tenet of socialism. With the reputation of central planning in the dumpster, the garbage heap worldwide, the socialists have moved to a different emphasis, the welfare state. The socialist state today is benevolent, egalitarian, nanny state, free stuff for the deprived. And really, there's not a free stuff at all. Somebody is paying for it. It's expensive both in the terms of the bureaucracy and demoralizing dependency it produces among the beneficiaries. Is this what Jesus has in mind? Not at all. Today, being Christmas, is especially timely to think about helping the poor. Yes, it was an important part, an integral part of Jesus' message. But how the helping is done is extremely important. Is it done by the doors, or is it done by providing them the opportunities and the means? Christians, and as a matter of fact, the whole world is commanded in the scripture to love, to pray, to be kind, to serve, to forgive, to be truthful, to worship one God, to learn and grow, both in spirit and character. And all these things are very personal. They require no politician, police, bureaucracy, political parties, or programs. They are inborn. You develop them individually. No government can force you to be kind, to forgive, to be truthful. The poor will always be with you, and you can help them anytime you want, says Jesus in Matthew 26:11. And then again, he says so in Mark 14:7. The key words are that you can help and you want to help. He didn't say, we are going to make you help whether you like it. That's a major difference. And then in Luke 12, verses 13 to 15, Jesus is approached with the redistribution request. Master, speak to my brother that he divideth the inheritance with me, a man asked. And what is Jesus' response? Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? And then he rebuked the petitioner for his envy, that his brother had more than he had. Christianity is not about passing the buck to the government when it comes to relieving the plight of the poor, caring for them, which means helping them overcome it, but not paying them to stay poor or make them dependent on the state, thereby depriving them of the essential human trait. And that has been an essential aspect, especially in gradient of Christmas, Christians for the last 2000 years. The Christian charity, being voluntary and heartfelt, is utterly distinct and different from compulsory, impersonal mandates decreed by the state. That's a major difference. But then you don't have to accept what I say. Consider what Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians 9, verse 7. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly and not under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Nowhere it is mandatory, obligatory, it is recommended. And very clearly, give what your heart wants to give, not under compulsion. That's the most important phrase. And then you remember that parable of Good Samaritans. The traveler is regarded as good because he personally had the stricken man at the roadside with his own time and his own resources. If instead of that he had urged the helpless guy to wait for the government check to arrive, then what we would call him today? Good for nothing Samaritan. He didn't ask or wait for the government check to arrive. He helped of his own volition. And that is charity, advocated by Christian concepts or other in all religions. Jesus was very clear and he understood that compassion is wholesome value to possess. But when I study New Testament, I don't find a single passage that this is a value which Jesus wanted to impose by force or at gunpoint, which are the hallmark of socialist politics. So how can you call him a socialist? Socialists are fond of suggesting that he disdained the rich, citing two particular moments He's driving on the money charges, changes from the temple, and his remark that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven. Both these arguments of the socialists are wrong. Jesus drove the money changers from the temple, not because they were rich. He never drove a money changer from a bank or from a marketplace. He drove them from the God's house because that was being misused. The church, God's house, is a place of worship, not for benefit, not for business. So that's why he drove the money changer from. But he didn't go to their office or their home to throw them out. No. And when he said it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, he was warning that the great wealth can be the base for the great temptation. And these are basically admonitions against misplaced priorities, not class war messages. We have to perceive them, what they are, what the intent was. And do you remember that parable of talents? Jesus talks of a man who entrusted his wealth to the three servants for a time. And when he returns, he learns that one of his servants safeguarded a share by burying it. The second put his share to the work and multiplied it. But none of these two is a hero. The third one is a hero, and he has invested and generated the greatest return of all. So he is a hero. The first one who buried it is admonished, and his share is taken and given to the third. Now look at it. He has not taken the share from the third who expanded his investment and gave it to the first who did not do anything. Does it in any way sound in conformity with what we perceive to be what socialism is? Does it sound like a welfare state? Does it not sound like capitalism? Well, look at here's a guy who invested money, returned it, so he's to be praised. And the man who has just buried it is supposed to give it to him so that he can generate further wealth. Then again, there's a parable of the workers in the vineyard. The story upholds capitalist virtues, not the socialist ones. When some workers complain that others are paid more, the employer rightfully defends the right for voluntary contract, private property, and in fact, the law of supply and demand. At the Christmas time and through the year, Jesus would want us, clearly direct us to be generous, to be helpful, to be compassionate, to have empathy. But if you think that he meant for the politicians to do it with the police power at twice the cost and half the effectiveness of private charity, I don't think you are reading the New Testament the way I am. The New Testament has to be read as it is rather than find hidden meanings. There are allegories, that's I deny. But then looking at them, seeing them, perceiving them is what is important. The parable of the workers in the vineyard, the parable of the talents, the good Samaritans, what is mentioned in Luke and Matthew, all Paul's statements is all clear evidence that Jesus was all for the milk of human kindness flowing in the body and the thoughts of the people. But he was never for a welfare state, a social state, which is a pernicious and in fact a very unchristian thought. The people who are Christians would believe in empathy, but not an enforced one. And as we have seen in the parable of talents, he was all for capitalism. Same as about the vineyard. So a person who is openly supporting The basic tenets of capitalism, how can we call him a socialist? That's a perversion of thought. Or it is selfish, self-centered idea being exploited by those people to exploit the poor, the people who are not aware, but who want charity without working and without deserving. This is the compassionate wanted you to work and earn. He wanted you to be helpful to the needy, not to encourage indolence, not to encourage hypocrisy, and not to encourage bloodsuckers as the sources want the poor to be just a parasites. He never wanted. Think about it. And Merry Christmas again. In the real sense of term, compassionate, full of empathy, full of love, but not just meaningless pity, which dehumanizes the recipient. Thank you.